Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Kong, and I'm one of the Microsoft technical trainers here at Microsoft. And I'm also one of your learning experts in the Azure Infrastructure by MTT's Learning Room. Say that again. Azure Infrastructure by MTT's Learning Room. It's a mouthful. Essentially what it is if now that you've all joined and you've seen it, is there's different rooms, as we call Teams channels. Those different channels have specific exams objectives that we can talk about. So this video that I'm going to be doing is focused on what you may see in AZ 104 and AZ 305 exam, and a specific topic called the dreaded load balancers. I'm just kidding. They're not that bad once you get to know them, but they are an essential part that you'll see in both exams. So it's a good, to really wrap your head around them and to really understand the key load balancers. Now, we do have 4 load balancers. So if you know those 4 load balancers, yell it out. Did you say it? If not, don't worry. Come to this whiteboard and let's look at it. So with the load balancers, the way I look at it, it's based on, global versus regional. And the other way I like to think about the load balancers is, at the OSI layer. So where are they at that OSI layer? So you heard me say a second ago that there is 4 different load balancers that you'll see in Azure. So let's first tackle the regional, and let's also tackle what OSI means. Now, does anyone remember the acronym for OSI? Right? Remember that acronym? Some of you might know different ones. There's only one that I really know, or I know there's a couple out there, but the one that I always reference to is, people do not throw sausage pizza away. If you don't know what I'm talking about, that's fine. I'm dating myself knowing this acronym, and I know the OSI layer has kind of changed up since, back in the 90s, but it's definitely about the different types of layers that you have. And, when we think of the different layers, I'm just going to write them all out here. Let me grab my mouse. Scroll up here a bit. When we think about them, it's the A apps TNDP. So people do not throw sausage pizza away. That makes sense. So when we look at the physical versus the data versus the network, transport. How many of you saying this with me? Session, presentation, and then finally our application layer. So when we think about, global versus regional, and then the OSI layer, hence why we have the 4 types of load balancers, because redundancy might be different depending on your application, right? And depending on your application, you may or may not need, some of these more robust load balancers. So let's look at our first one. And again, we're going to tackle regional. And the first one I'm going to talk about is our simple, fast, quick Azure Load Balancer. So the Azure Load Balancer is what we call, scroll over here, our regional load balancer. Right? It works within a region. And as we know in Azure, Azure has multiple regions all over the globe. And then also within a region, we have multiple zones. But I'm not going to get into, the weeds on that. But basically what it is that, this load balancer is 9 times out of 10 directly connected to your application web front end servers, for example. And it's the one that gives you that simple IP port type of connectivity. And when we think of IP port type of connectivity, where does that sit in OSI? Right? What layer is that? And if you answered network or transport, you're absolutely right. So this one will support those layers. So this load balancer is quite fast because it doesn't have a lot of overhead. It's just working with IP port. And when we look at it in the grand scheme of things, if I was to scroll over here and draw this out, you can see in here, let's say I have a single virtual network, right? And then I have, a couple web front end servers. sorry, my boxes are misconstrued. So, I've got a couple of my web front end servers. Then in here, I can have my Azure Load Balancer is attached to my network connected to these back end servers. And the way it's going to connect is through, an HTTP port, right? It could be 80 or 443, right? And that's a simple type of fast in connection. Both of these web front end servers are hosting the same application, and you just need fast in and out access. Perfect, done. That's the Azure Load Balancer, pretty straightforward. Now, when we look at the other load balancer, when you want to start doing a little bit more type of, I'm trying to think of the way to put this, some type of application management, then we need to look at a higher layer in the OSI. And when we think of that type of load balancer, what is that called? Anybody know? Yell it out if you know. Application gateway. Now, this is also a regional gateway, right? Or load balancer, named gateway, but it's a load balancer. This one will sit in the OSI layer of the application, right? So it sits at the application layer and allows a little bit more management of that type of application gateway. You can create what my favorite, and I used to use this, I used to manage SharePoint farms all the time. Similar to the SharePoint farm had this capability, is that if you had multiple web front end servers hosting different application, you can have one gateway, and based on the request, it goes to that. So you're like sitting there going, what does that look like, Sarah? Glad you asked. So in this example, what I can show you in here, oops, let me erase that. Microsoft Whiteboard needs you when you create a box. It has to be, can't lift your pen. So that way it snaps properly. There we go. So now in here, I could have, a server, couple servers in here, right? And let's say these servers are hosting my Contoso.com. And then I can have a couple more servers, and these servers could be hosting my Fabricam.com. And then essentially what I could have is I can have a single application gateway sitting here, and these gateways can be connected to both of these. So you basically will create what we call two back-end pools, right, to a single gateway, your load balancer, and then based on the call that the person makes, so if they want to go to Contoso, then the gateway sees that request, it comes in, and it sends them to these servers, right? You have another person that's over here that wants to come in, and they're going to go to Fabricam. That request will come in here, the same gateway, and that's going to go to these servers. So as you can see, the application gateway allows for a little bit more of application layer features. And because of that, this one will also be a bit slower, right? But it's because it's doing a little bit more on the back end, hence the Azure Load Balancer. So those are your regional load balancers. Now, let's say in here, and let's scroll back over here. Actually, let me draw a different one, a fresh one here for you. Let's say you have an office that's sitting in Toronto, which is, I'm not too far from that. And then you have an office that's sitting in, say, let's pick a city. Let's pick London, where I was born. Good UK, and then you've got your Toronto, Canada. So now you have two offices sitting in here, and you have the same application. So you have an app one is sitting here, and app one is also sitting here. But now you want to make this application, redundant between the two regions. So for example, if I'm sitting in, Denver, Colorado, right? I would hope I wouldn't go to that. Right? Imagine me jumping the pond and going to London. That would be a little bit ridiculous, right? So this is where we start looking at what we call our global load balancers. And the global load balancers will help you be able to make sure your requests are going from one region or another based on different types of routing methods that you can do. You can do failover, you can do like this priority, you can do performance. I think there's 6 of them. I can't rattle them off on my head just yet or right now, but there's basically 6 of them. So what are our global load balancers? Well, we have 2, right? And we have one called, that's been around, just as long as the other 2, Traffic Manager. And I love the name of this because it's so obvious. Oops. Lost my pen there. It's so obvious based on the name what it actually does. It manages the traffic between your global regions. Remember that, right? It's a great way to remember it for the exam or just, understanding it. Traffic manager manages traffic between my regions. Done, right? And there's like 5 routing methods that you can use to know that. Do you need to know that for the exam? Yeah. Know your routing methods, especially for the AZ 305 exam. AZ 104, they probably won't heavily test you on the routing methods. The AZ 104, whoops, keep hitting my button on my pen here. This is AZ 104. And then when we get into the AZ 305, you need to know Traffic Manager, which is kind of a DNS sort of layer, global load balancer. I wouldn't want to say it's a layer 4. That's not quite 100% right because it does the DNS resolution and everything, but it's definitely not an application layer. So if you were trying to say, is it equivalent to this one when it comes to the OSI layer? Yes, but no. Let's not like kind of label it, but just know that it's not the one that's going to give you that application acceleration or anything like that. If you want that application acceleration and that application layer support, then the last one that you want to know is the Azure Front Door. The Azure Front Door is your global, and that one works at, your layer. Oops, let me go over here. So this one will sit in OSI at your application in here. So the Azure Front Door will allow you to route your traffic. So Azure Front Door, as well as Azure Load Balancer. Here, let me erase this. So you've got Azure Front Door. Ooh. And you've got your Traffic Manager. And they will support that global balancing. Okay? They can support routing traffic between your regions based on, the specifications that you put. And the biggest difference between Traffic Manager and Azure Front Door is Azure Traffic Manager allows you, there's 5 routing methods. Again, know that for the AZ 305 exam. Right? There's 5 routing methods, like I can do failover, I can do priority, I can do IP based, stuff like that. So it does somewhat work at layer 4, but it also gives you kind of that DNS resolution as well, right? So allowing you to do all of that. And then your Azure Front Door, that one will allow for application acceleration. I don't know how to spell acceleration. Acceleration. We'll just leave it like that. So the application, my brain's not thinking how to spell that. And that one will work at more the layer 8. So that's your 4 load balancers. Not too bad, right? When you think about it and you map it out like this and draw it out, you can see you've got 2 that are regional. One sits in the layer 4, right? So this is your layer 4. And then one sits in layer 7 in the OSI. And then when we look at the traffic manager and the Azure front door, those are two globals, right? One sits, I don't really like saying this, but kind of like the layer 4, it gives you that DNS, and then the Azure front door sits at your layer 7. Now they'll also include the layer 7 ones also have support for layer 4 capabilities as well. So it's all about, what you need, how much money you have. It's all about the bottom dollar, how much money, how much administration overhead you're going to need or you want to configure. So yeah, the Azure front door and the application are a little bit more, I wouldn't say hard, but there's a little bit more to administer, right, and to configure. Whereas the traffic manager, even that one has a little bit more to administer. Azure Load Balancer is pretty simple. It's just bucket and pools and so on. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you, have a little bit more clarification on our Azure Load Balancers. If you have any questions about this video, please feel free to post it in our channels. And happy learning, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.